that this is a friendly environment and all want to hear. So please mute yourself during the presentation, and also we will shut off our video during the presentation to limit the bandwidth. So without further ado, I will now give the screen to the presenter. Georgie, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Do you hear me? Maybe that's the first sanity check here.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. First of all, thanks to the colleagues from ESB for giving me the opportunity to present our work here. And so I'm a researcher at the Institute of Creative Media Technologies at the St. Pölten University of Applied Sciences, and I'm also a PhD student at the TU Wien, the Technical University in Vienna, in Austria. My research focus is on machine learning and pattern recognition, and my research interests are on time series analysis, computer vision, explainable AI, and multimodal machine learning. For this work, we established a collaboration with colleagues from Germany and Austria, from 5 different institutions, and we were an interdisciplinary team with expertise from the clinical field, from the field of biomechanics, and the field of machine learning. First of all, I would like to introduce the concept of explainability and explainable AI, starting with the following example. So on the left-hand side, we see an input image that we want to classify. It depicts a viaduct, but we also see some other objects in there, like a house and some trees. And let's say we want to classify this image, so we need a machine learning model or a deep neural network. Nowadays, such models are used for computer vision. And this model predicts the correct class in our example. So the prediction is also viaduct. On the one hand, this is a great achievement. And on the downside, state-of-the-art models like deep neural networks have this black box characteristics, and therefore the user, we, cannot easily understand why a model made a certain prediction. That's the reason why the field of explainable AI emerged in recent years, and this field offers methods that can explain the model and its predictions. And in this example on the right-hand side, layer-wise relevance propagation was used. It's an explainable AI method to get the explanation. So if we take a closer look at the red regions that are highlighted here, those regions are the relevant regions for the class viaduct, so the predicted class. And there's small regions that are blue in the background, for example, the roof of the house, and those regions are relevant for other classes. And we see that the arch of the viaduct is the most relevant feature, and that also makes sense. And because we would probably also use this feature to classify a viaduct. Machine learning has been increasingly used also for gait analysis data, and we would like to have similar explanations for this type of data as we saw with the image data. So since explainability methods have not been used so far for biomechanical time series data, we wanted to demonstrate the possibilities and usefulness of explainable AI for this field. And our goal was to investigate and explain class-specific characteristics that the model learned from the clinical Gait data and used this characteristic to classify it. We followed 2 research questions. The first one, which signal regions are most relevant for the given Gait classification task? And the second, to what extent are these regions that are relevant in line with statistical and clinical assessment. We utilize data from human gait analysis. In our experiments, we used a subset of a publicly available dataset called Gait. This dataset comprises ground reaction force data of healthy controls and patients with functional gait disorder at the ankle, knee, and hip. And this gait disorder classes, ankle, knee, and hip, include patients after joint replacement surgery, fractures, ligament ruptures, and related disorder at the level of the ankle, knee, and hip. The individuals walked unassisted and barefoot at the self-selected walking speed. And as we can see in the table, the dataset is quite balanced regarding the number of persons per class, with the healthy control class being the largest class and the hip class being the smallest, with 37 patients. In total, we had almost 1,000 trials for our experiments, and we conducted 4 binary classification tasks and analyzed them in detail. So that would be the healthy control versus hip, healthy control versus knee, healthy control versus ankle, and healthy controls versus a joint gait disorder class. We developed several machine learning models to solve these classification tasks and explained different architectures, but in this presentation, I'll present the results of convolutional neural networks. First, we concatenated the force components of the affected side and then the components of the unaffected side, and then we provided this one-dimensional input vector to the machine learning model. In this example, we provided samples from a patient having a functional gait disorder at the knee, and the model, in this case a CNN, predicted the right class, so the knee class. But similarly to our initial example with the viaduct, and we don't know why the model made this prediction. To tackle this problem, we used a well-known explainable AI method called layer-wise relevance propagation and adapted it for one-dimensional input data. And basically, this method identifies regions in the input signals that are relevant for a certain prediction. In our example here, the yellow and red regions in these visualizations are the most relevant for the prediction knee. In order to evaluate the results of LRP from a statistical point of view, we used statistical parametric mapping. And from a clinical point of view, we had 2 clinical experts in our team that did the evaluation. Layer-wise relevance propagation is an explainability method proposed by Bach and colleagues in 2015. Bach, or now Lepushkin, was also part or member of the team that worked on this. And in this visualization here, we see a neural network for a binary classification task. On the left-hand side, there's the input of the network, and on the right-hand side, there's the output. And what LRP actually does is it propagates the prediction at the output neuron backward through the whole network, and until the input features are reached. And we get for each input feature relevance score that determines to which degree it contributed to the final prediction. So it's something similar to the Kirchhoff laws in electrical circuits. I'll briefly explain the visualizations of our results on the example of the classification task healthy control versus gait disorders. The CNN achieved an accuracy of 88% for this task, and for the other task, the accuracy was quite similar, between 85 and 88%. In subfigure A, we depicted the mean waveforms for both classes. And in the background of each of the subfigures that we see in this visualization, we showed the results of SPM as gray boxes. So those were the regions that were significantly different between the classes. In subfigure B, we see the averaged relevance for the healthy controls class. This is not a prediction explanation that we show here, but a model explanation. So we tried to identify class-specific patterns here by averaging the individual prediction explanations that we get from LRP. We did the same for the other class, the gait disorder class, and we see also here that the results or the explanations are complementary. So what's important or what's relevant for one class is irrelevant for the other, kind of, or it's also relevant for the other, but it speaks in favor of the other. In subfigure D, we visualize the effect size, which was computed as the Pearson's correlation coefficient. That's the green line. And the purple line was the total relevance. It's a measure that we introduced. It's basically the sum of the relevances of both classes. So the things depicted in subfigure B and C, and then normalized. And so the green line is the effect size, and it's the SPM-based result that we want to compare with the total relevance, which is the LRP-based result. If we take a closer look at the signals of the affected side, we see that the highest relevances are obtained for the vertical ground reaction force. However, there are also highly relevant regions in the horizontal forces, so the mediolateral and anterior posterior. And interestingly, also for the unaffected side, we also can see rather highly relevant regions in the unaffected, in the signals of the unaffected side. And both of these findings also apply to the other tasks that we investigated. So are relevant regions according to LRP also statistically significantly different between the classes? The statistical evaluation showed a high agreement between LRP and SPM. So those are the blue boxes that we see here. So many of the input features used by the machine learning model were also significantly different between the classes. And the total relevance and the effect size showed also strong positive correlation. Here we see two examples, the healthy controls versus gait disorder classification task, and the healthy controls versus HIP, which had the smallest correlation with 0.66. There are also regions that show similar behavior between the total relevance and the effect size. However, the SPM results doesn't indicate significant differences here. And the red regions show the disagreement between LRP and SPM. There are basically two cases here. Either the model uses regions where the effect size is rather small, or there are regions where SPM indicates significant differences, but the machine learning model doesn't use them. Are relevant regions according to LRP also in line with clinical assessment? Clinicians considered many of the relevant regions as clinically meaningful. For example, for the classification task healthy control versus ankle, the results of LRP were in line with the work of Sun and colleagues from 2019. And here the authors also identified differences in the vertical and anterior posterior components in terminal stance. And they didn't find any differences in the mediolateral component, where our results showed also rather small relevances. So can explainable AI be used to identify different classification strategies of machine learning models? So far, we've used model explanations by averaging the individual prediction across all samples of a given class. To conduct a more comprehensive model explanation, we clustered in the next step the individual explanations and didn't calculate the average. And we did it using a method called spray. In the next step, we evaluated whether the resulting clusters are meaningful. So the visualization on the right-hand side is for the classification task, healthy control versus gait disorders, but we'll take a closer look at the gait disorder subfigures, so D to F. Please note here also that we didn't explicitly provide the labels hip, knee, and ankle to the model during the training process in this task. We used it here just in subfigure D to analyze the resulting clusters. Subfigure E shows the participant labeling. So each color in this plot is unique for each person in the data, and a subfigure F shows the clustering obtained with spray. So there are clusters like the one that is highlighted here, which contain explanations of samples belonging to only one patient. And there were clusters where the model learned patterns belonging to a specific subclass. So for this cluster, we can see that the model learned similar features for a group of samples belonging to the hip class. And by looking at the participant labeling, we can see that the explanations are belonging to two patients. So by using spray, we showed that the model can learn different strategies for individuals and also for patient groups without explicitly getting this information. The last question, can explainable AI be used to identify biases in machine learning models? So another important example of the usefulness of explainable AI is to determine whether there is a bias that was learned from the data or not in the model. And we will show this on the example of the healthy control versus knee classification task. Here the clinicians identified regions in the unaffected vertical ground reaction force during terminal stance. And they argued here that the high relevance in these regions was more due to walking speed differences than due to some compensatory behavior of the unaffected side. And what we did in the next step, we trained another model on a subset of the original data without significant differences in walking speed. And the results showed fairly similar relevances for all regions except for the previously identified regions. These results indicate that the original model learned a certain bias here related to the walking speed. In our work, we showed that LRP can be used to identify relevant regions for gait classification, and most of these relevant regions are in line with statistical and clinical evaluation. We further showed that by using explainable AI methods, we can identify the different learning strategies of machine learning models and to detect biases in machine learning models. Thank you very much. I would like to thank also the funding agencies that supported our research, and I'm looking forward to your questions and our discussion.
Thank you very much, Jorge.
Also, thank you for all the participants or the audience that joined us in the meantime. So how we are going to do here the question and answer, the idea is that you can indicate in the chat if you have questions, and we will then give you the floor and you can unmute yourself. If you feel reluctant to speak in the call, that's fine for us. You can then type your questions in the chat and we will monitor it. I also want to indicate here that we are recording the journal club. If someone objects to that, please indicate it in the chat now, and then we can stop the recording for the discussion. So finally, I also want to remind you that we want to create a very supportive atmosphere of which we can all learn. So with this, I open the paper for questions. And yeah, Gabriele, you want to shoot the first question?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks. Can you hear me, right? Okay. So yeah, first, Georgia, my compliments for the paper. I'm not an expert on this field, but I really liked the presentation. It was very clear, and as well the paper. So it really gives a lot of ideas. As you were saying, you have a nice application of these exploratory models, machine learning models, to biomechanics, and that's probably where I'm really mostly curious, and on especially the relationship with patient-specific data. So if this model can somehow, this exploratory model can be used to identify patterns that could be patient-specific, or you know, use it also to, because you're saying usually machine learning models are a black box, but in this case you might even identify specific patterns in your gait analysis that can be associated to a patient or to a specific disorder, right? So how can we use this?
So basically there are several applications. First of all, like if we leave out explainability as aspect, we could use such approaches to do some kind of similarity retrieval and get similar patients, because these models learn abstract features from the data and try to learn robust features, and we could use those features in retrieval, and that could be also done. And we showed that the model learns similar patterns for one individual or similar individuals.
That's really cool. So within the disorder, you can really then split. You can really
one example.
Yeah. I think there's just a little.
Yeah, you can find different strategies. There were also some. Sorry.
There's just a little bit of delay, so I can't.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can.
Okay, sorry. So we saw also that there were also some clusters that were more heterogeneous. So for these examples, could be interested to investigate if certain patterns are maybe similar between classes. And that's so good.
Great. I don't know whether it's me, but I couldn't hear fully the answer.
No, I think it was broken up a little bit, Georgia. It seems that your internet is playing up a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Could you repeat the last answer?
Sorry. So we saw also some clusters where, in the clusters it was like they were more heterogeneous. So there were different classes also within one cluster, and it would be interesting to investigate whether certain patterns are maybe similar between different classes.
Exactly.
And that's actually what this method allows us to do.
So what I really liked about this work is that, I mean, you don't use the machine learning just a black box giving you the final output, but it can also help then really asking new questions and even, you know, really dividing patients in different groups, like accumulate them, for example. So that's very informative. Great.
Are there any questions from the audience at the moment? I'm monitoring the chat, but at the moment it seems quite quiet. So something that I wanted to ask here, and after that we go to Peter Ogat, who wants to ask, yes. But one thing that I had here, your input are ground reaction forces. To what extent would it be possible to also, for instance, have like kinematics moments, like different variables that have different magnitudes, different features as well? How is your method going to handle that? Could we import EMG, for instance?
Excellent. Yeah. Basically, the input could be everything that can be used for classification or regression. It works for both kind of problems. And we're also working currently on explainability approaches and also with LRP, where we classify kinematics and kinetics. So it is possible, and the method has it's no problem for it. We just wanted to use an easy use case to demonstrate kind of the usefulness of it, and yeah, I think the ground reaction force were kind of the way to go to show it in the most simple way.
Okay, thank you. Then I want to give the word to Peter Ogat. Please, can I ask you to also introduce yourself maybe briefly, that we know who is speaking? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ilse. Yeah, my name is Peter Augat. I'm from the BG Murnau Hospital in Germany, and I'm running a research institute here. We also do gait analysis. And my question regards to the clinical application of your method. And one challenge in the clinical interpretation of gait data is often that we do not exactly know which part or which information from the gait analysis is responsible for a typical feature of a patient. And so machine learning could help to identify features hidden within that large amount of data. And you very nicely demonstrated in your work that you were able to identify those features. I'm just wondering if, I mean, for one individual person, you do have a large amount of data available for each joint, the knee joint, the hip joint, the ankle joint, and then the time course of the data. Is the amount of individuals that you tested for each group sufficient to identify those features, so that in retrospective you then would be able to identify those features in a prospective patient that comes in? I don't know if I made myself clear. I
so
mean,
if the models
based
are
on the data that
generalizable?
Based on the data that you have, you show nice these groupings, and the classification works well. But then if a new patient comes into your group with new features that differ, how reliable are your classification data, so that you can then prospectively analyze an individual patient?
Yeah, we basically did k-fold cross-validation in our study. So we split it up the data into 10 folds and used always one of the folds as fold that the model was not trained on, and evaluated then the trained model, which, yeah, we used kind of the remaining 9, or actually we used 8 and 1 was the validation, but the remaining data we used for training, and this one fold was the test fold that was kind of unseen to the model. And we did it kind of 10 times. So this 80% average over the 10 folds.
Mm. Yeah, that is a very frequently applied technology. But I'm always wondering, because the amount of data for each individual patient is potentially more information than the amount of patients you have. So there is always this challenge of how are you able to predict somebody that is not in your group. But again, I mean, this is a fantastic work, and I congratulate you for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that remark. Also thinking from a clinical perspective, typically decisions are made on a combination of not only signals, but also sources of information. For instance, the clinical exam, which would be a completely different set of data than this. And I know your study was not designed to this, but I just am wondering, to what extent would it be possible to also include that type of information in these approaches?
What type of data is it? Just to.
It's
like,
value.
Is it,
it's a parameter.
Or is it just parameters with some categorical values, for example?
Yeah, and for clinicians, they have an interpretation. It's, for instance, a knee angle of 50 degrees. That is the maximal flexion range, for instance. So, and clinicians use these to kind of have an idea on what they make conclusions on that, on the causes of the gait abnormality. So I'm wondering to what extent also that type of information could be integrated here.
So there could be, we could use a multimodal where we have kind of different modalities, the time series data, image data, for example, and some parameters that the clinicians use, and have kind of one network that use all of these information. And we could, that's an active research field, explainability for multimodal approaches. All of the modalities.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility.
Maybe. Yeah, I guess, but it's still an active research question, I guess, how such methods can be implemented for multimodal networks.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, LRP can be implemented for it because it kind of goes through the whole network, but there are also other explanation methods where it's kind of tricky to use them for multimodal networks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the people in the call? Please feel free to either type it in the chat or to raise your hands.
I would like to ask something about the presence of multiple disorders. So assuming you have a patient with multiple disorder, would you think you need another training set, or maybe this model can already? Because I mean, you have the separate disorders, right? So I don't know whether, I mean, a patient with multiple disorders could be considered as a linear combination of two different disorders, right?
Yes. Basically, what the network would predict is probably one of the pathological classes. So it couldn't say, okay, I mean, you get a certain probability if you have, for example, we also tried multi-class classification, classifying like 4 different patterns, but here boundary action force enough, and direction is for like each class. And you would get, for example, for the knee class, a probability of 50%, and for the ankle class, a probability of 40%, and 10% for the hip, for example. So this could be an option, or you would have to do a kind of transfer learning. So use the model you have, and then have another labels and kind of fine-tune this model to the new labels.
Oh, I see. But yeah, but the concept of probability is really helpful even from that perspective, because then each class would have even an explanatory, right? So each different class will have an explanatory, let's say, output. So you could really say for this class, this area contributed to give this percentage. Okay.
Yeah, you could say, okay, if I want, so the model put kind of the knee class, but you can also select kind of the hip class and look which patterns would active or would be relevant if the model predicted that this sample is a hip problem.
Great. Great, thanks.
Welcome.
Okay, I see that someone is typing a question. Maybe in the meantime, to follow up on something that was already raised by the previous person, he was indicating, okay, how many trials, well, he was talking about number of patients, number of data sets, like how much data would you need of one patient in order for the would you need a certain limited number of trial for one subject, for instance, to have to be able to do this classification, or would one trial be sufficient? How should I see this?
We did once a study on this where we compared kind of the mean waveform versus the median waveform versus the most representative trial, and yeah, and kind of I think it were like 8 trials used, and with a higher number of samples. So not just using the most representative trial, for example, the model was better. So how to put it, kind of the variability in the data, if it's kind of in the training and if you provide it to the model, it can learn from it. And the more the better, I guess, for deep learning. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question in the chat from Sebastian Bachmann. I will read it for you. So thank you for the great talk. So big compliment. You showed the difference between SPM and the relevance of the feature. My question would be if you have found any new and previously unknown features in the machine learning model that were not detected by SPM or the experts, and which are not biases the model learns.
So maybe we can go back to the slide. So these red highlighted regions are the ones that are sorry, where there is a disagreement between I'm sorry.
George, I think you're still muted.
Okay. Thanks. yeah, here there are certain regions where there is a disagreement between
I think we have a combination of technical problems and respiratory problems at hand here.
yeah, I'm sorry, I got a cold week and I thought it will get better, but still not there. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So there are certain regions where there is a certain disagreement between SPM and LRP. And I think, like if you take this one, take a closer look at this one, there are certain regions where SPM is says, okay, there are some significant differences here, but the model doesn't use them. That's not really surprising, because that can happen if the model has kind of other features that are maybe more robust or can learn more information from them, that it doesn't use these regions. But there are also regions where it's kind of an opposite behavior, like the effect size is here almost zero and here it's kind of peaking. So the model learned these parts, and what could happen is that these parts, but in a non-linear fashion. So it combines several portions of the signal in a non-linear fashion and combines them. And that's why we don't see it kind of in the input space with SPM. That could be one explanation for it. Yeah, but those are definitely the regions that could be addressed in future research and investigate it more.
Okay, good. There is a follow-up question, and also Sebastian says, okay, I see, thank you for the explanation, so that's good. Then there's a question by Yorgos Jarmatsis. Hi, Yorgos. He asks you, do you think we can apply such methods in regression type machine learning models? For instance, if we want to predict joint forces from kinematics during gait cycle, can we see which part of the data in kinematics are used most to predict the joint forces? Okay, can you? Yeah, okay, yeah.
This method can be also applied to regression problems. So you wouldn't, you don't have kind of a probability, but you have kind of the regression output. So it would work.
It would work. Okay, good. It's a nice, so for indicating the features that would be the key candidates to go into regression equations. That's basically okay. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. Are there any further remaining questions here? So I would like to conclude with a very general question, like what is the follow-up study after this? How do we take this forward? What will be the next step in this research area for you, George?
So one step is, as I mentioned, kinematic and kinetic data, like a combination of both. Actually, currently we're working on cerebral palsy patients. And another direction is a comparison of different explainability because there's a bunch of new methods, and there's a whole ecosystem with explainable AI methods.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I think here I would like to conclude, unless Gabriele, you want to add something as a final question?
No, I mean, as I said before, I'm really happy to see this type of application to biomechanics, because I didn't know about this possibility, even to retrospectively kind of discover a little bit what's inside the black box, or how this black box gets an idea of the output. So thanks a lot for showing it. No, and I have no further question.
Okay, so I want to thank the speaker again, and also the audience. And of course, we would like to do these type of journal clubs in the future more often. So keep track of the ESB newsletter, because we hope to do a similar exercise this fall. So thank you very much all. And with this, we will conclude the journal club. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.